As the Middle East Quartet prepares to meet in Washington, the Israeli architect of the Oslo Accords calls on the Palestinian president to declare the so-called peace process dead. We ask, is it time to move beyond a two-state solution? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Rattansi. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is expected to send a letter to the Israeli Prime Minister in the coming days, laying out the conditions for a return to direct negotiations. Such negotiations have been frozen since September of 2010. Abbas had been expected to include a paragraph threatening to dissolve the Palestinian Authority in protest against the deadlock. This move would force Israel to take back control of the West Bank and Gaza and render the so-called peace process dead. But according to press reports, Abbas removed the paragraph under pressure from US President Barack Obama, who called the Palestinian president last month to, quote, reaffirm America's commitment to Middle East peace. Last week, the Israeli architect of the 1993 Oslo Accords, Yossi Beilin, published an open letter to Abbas. He called on him not to give in to Obama's request and instead dissolve the Palestinian Authority. Earlier I spoke to Beilin from Paris. I asked him why he felt the time had come to, in his words, end this farce.
Well, I really believe that we created the process for 5-6 years. There was a deadline for May the 4th, 1999. Nothing happened then. And the opponents of the Oslo Agreement on both sides made out of our corridor a kind of a living room. They are quite happy because in the meantime, Israel continues to build settlements. The extremists on the Palestinian side are not there to divide the land. They are waiting for perhaps the Islamic Republic or the Islamic Empire or whatever. And those who wanted peace, who created the Oslo process, became kind of hostages to this process. I think that it is time to say enough is enough. The Oslo process has ended. And now what we have to do is to go towards a permanent solution, if possible. If not, let us dissolve the institutions which were built and which perpetuate actually the interim agreement forever.
But is that, I mean, let's to clarify that point then, if, as a result of the dissolution of the Oslo institutions and the PA and so forth, both sides, or at least and certainly the Israelis, refuse though to come with a viable Palestinian state, a two-state solution, then would you be for a binational democratic state?
Well, I do not believe that there will be such a situation because eventually no government in Israel will accept such a situation. So if a government in Israel understands that there is a majority of Palestinians, which is not yet the case but might be very soon, under a Jewish minority, it will withdraw unilaterally, exactly as Sharon withdrew from Gaza. So the point is that today there is no leverage. The Americans are doing nothing because of the elections. The Europeans are busy with their economic situation. And the quartet is actually dead. I mean, they are going to have a meeting on Wednesday, which is a joke in my view. They cannot move anything. The only ones who can move things are us, the Palestinians and the Israelis, those of us who really want to move things towards peace. And here, the Palestinian leverage might be a very painful one, because it is not very easy to dissolve the institutions. Many people work for these institutions, but only if something like that happens, and the Palestinians are saying to us, to the Israelis, okay, these are the keys, take the responsibility, pay for our services and whatever, I think that something must move then.
Are you surprised that President Abbas didn't heed your call, that he dropped his, what we thought was going to be his threat to dissolve the Palestinian Authority?
We had a long discussion the other day, and he told me that after the exchange of letters with the Israeli government, which in my view, by the way, is just a ritual. The Palestinians know exactly what will be the answers to the Israeli government for their demands of the 67 borders and of the seas of settlements. And the Israelis know what will be the answers of the Palestinians to their demands. And then the Palestinians will go on to the UN Assembly General in order to get the status of a non-member state. And then the issue of the dissolution of the authority will be on the table. He told me very clearly that this option, which is of course not very simple, we all know it, will be considered in the coming weeks.
What do you think is motivating the quartet at the moment, though, to keep on convening these talks when I think behind closed doors, frankly, a lot of people say what you're saying?
Well, the quartet was wrong from the beginning. I cannot understand how come that the UN became a part of a club of other three states or state organizations. I don't understand why it was established. It did nothing until now. The meetings are worthless. I can say it, I'm an independent person. I do not belong now to any institution, and I can say it very clearly. It is the wrong organization. It does nothing. And it just keeps a fig leaf of meetings and resolutions, and they call upon the parties to sit together and to talk about the permanent agreement. There is no chance in the world. Not if they meet in Jordan, not if they meet in Washington or elsewhere. Today, there is no chance to have a permanent agreement. It is because on the one hand, the Israeli government is not ready to pay the price for peace, and the Palestinian side is also not united, and Gaza is another problem. So right now, regretfully, the only option to negotiate about is about the second phase of the roadmap, which is a Palestinian state in provisional borders, with a vision which will be given to the Palestinians about the permanent solution and a timetable for the permanent solution. If this is possible, and this is something that the quartet should have encouraged both parties to do, but they don't do that. And if this is impossible, then I believe that the only solution is the dissolution of the Palestinian Authority.
So, has time run out for a two-state solution? And should the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas ignore US pressure and dissolve the Palestinian Authority? To discuss this, we're joined from New York by Matthew Doyle. He's the former spokesman for the Quartet representative Tony Blair. In the studio, we have Diana Buttu, former legal advisor to President Abbas and the Palestinian negotiating team, and by Rob Malley, Middle East and North Africa program director at the International Crisis Group. He also served as special assistant to President Bill Clinton for Arab-Israeli affairs. Matthew Doyle, isn't Yossi Beilin basically expressing the obvious? This isn't working, it hasn't worked, it's not likely to work anytime soon, if ever.
Well, no, I don't agree with that. I mean, I think what we heard from Yossi Beilin was really, in a sense, a counsel of despair. Now, we can get into a debate as to why he's got to that conclusion, but I don't agree with his conclusion as to what is the best way to move forward. I think there are things that he said that I would agree with, such as, for example, there will only be agreement ultimately if the parties themselves want it. And in that extent, the quartet will be led by the parties themselves. If they want to have an agreement, then they are the ones who will ultimately determine whether there's an agreement or not. But I don't agree with him about the overall conclusions he had about the role that the quartet has been playing. If you look at the statement from last September, then there were very clear questions there for both the parties to come forward with proposals on territory and security. So we can debate where we are, but ultimately I think what we know is that the way that this is going to be solved is through re-engagement between the parties, and I'm sure that's what Wednesday's meeting of the quartet will focus on.
Diana Buttu, it's not something I say very often, but it would appear that you and Yossi Beilin are on the same page on this.
Ironically, yes. Although we disagree on a number of issues, I think that what he's come out and said very clearly is that the quartet has not done anything, that it's actually been, in effect, useless, and that we should be moving beyond this. On that, I agree. Where I disagree is I don't think that Yossi Beilin views Palestinians as equal. equals, whether that's in the form of equal statehood or equal citizenship, and so that's where we disagree. I think it's also important to add that one of the problems with the quartet and one of the problems with the advocates of the quartet is that they view this problem as being a symmetrical one. There's a huge asymmetry of power, with Israel being the occupier and the Palestinians being the occupied. And unless we begin to recognize that and move forward by making demands of the occupier, we're never going to be able to get anywhere.
I mean, Robert Malley, I mean, there are some who'd say, who'd be not terribly surprised that this is how things, how the discussion has developed. I mean, there were many who said Oslo in the first place. I think Edward Said famously said it was official Palestinian consensus for continued occupation. This is how the Oslo Accord was supposed to work in some ways. It kept the Palestinians separated in non-contiguous areas. It meant that they had to fight for everything with the Israelis. Should we be surprised that Oslo, that many people are saying that it's time to dismantle this entire structure?
I'm not sure that this was inevitable. I'm not sure that was the intent of the people who were behind it. What I think is clear is that whether we want to say the peace process is dead or merely comatose, there's no doubt that it's failed, and that continuing the way we've continued so far, we've proceeded so far, there's no reason, no logical reason to believe that it will succeed. Yossi Beilin comes up with one idea, which is to dissolve the PA. My view is, let's take a step back, think of many options. The Palestinians' mistake at this point is not that they've decided that the status quo isn't working. It's not that they're considering ideas, it's that they're considering every idea all at the same time. One day it's dissolving the PA. The next day it's popular resistance. The third day it's going to the UN. The fourth day it's sending a letter, which suddenly has become sort of the way you move the process.
But these aren't mutually exclusive, are they? I mean,
you have to choose what you're going to do and make sure that you could stick with it. I don't think when President Abbas says to Yossi Beilin he might dissolve the PA that he knows whether he means it today or tomorrow. I think what's been lacking is, but the first step is recognizing failure of the past and then trying to take a deep breath and thinking, what are the strategies for the future?
Before we go further, what does dissolving the PA actually mean? What would be different? What function does the PA currently serve, Diana?
That's a good question, and this has been a threat that he's used in the past. The function that it currently serves is that it provides jobs, but more importantly, it's now unfortunately become the subcontractor to Israel's occupation, meaning that Palestinians are supposed to provide security to Israel rather than Israel providing security to the Palestinians. This is why there's a lot of discontent with the Palestinian Authority and the way that it's functioned. I think that dissolving it, there's a lot of different variations of dissolving it. What I personally would like to see is that in its current function, in the way that it currently functions, it has to be changed, not necessarily dissolved. And what I mean by that is because it's not as though Israel is going to somehow magically come in and take over all of the services that the Palestinian Authority does. They didn't do it before 1994, before the Palestinian Authority was created, and I have no reason to believe that they'll do it even after the Palestinian Authority is dissolved. But what needs to happen is there needs to be a new direction for this Palestinian Authority, one that is very clearly advocating what it wants, whether it's a decolonization project or whether it's one that advocates one person, one vote.
Matthew Doyle, I mean, that was one of the criticisms of your former boss, Tony Blair's mission to the occupied territories, this building up of institutions. It was just simply building up that structure which allowed Israel to keep the Palestinian territories under occupation. I mean, that was only one criticism of Tony Blair's mission. I mean, what do you make of that? This doesn't, I mean, it wasn't working, it's not working, it's just making the occupation even ever more impervious to change.